just before sort of kicking off the panel is we're just going to preview the case studies. But before we do that, we're actually also just going to make sure we've got a working definition in the room in terms of what we mean by emerging tech. Do you mind just giving the audience a sense of what do we mean by emerging tech from our perspective?
Sure. So emerging tech, so if you look at the word emerge or emergent, it means the process of coming into existence. So in technology, that means the development of new technology that's currently under development, or it can mean the application of tech but in a new space. It's often pretty experimental, and it's characterised by these 4 elements. So it's novel, it has the potential for huge impact. It's rapidly evolving, so often software updates that are available at the end of a project aren't available at the beginning, which is helpful, but it is what it is. And then the last thing is, because of this, it's often uncertain and ambiguous to deliver because it's not yet established. But the most exciting thing, I think, really about emerging tech is that we've got these new platforms and new software and updates and all of these things that are sort of coming to fruition right now. And that means for organisations, it's a really exciting time because you're able to sort of play and experiment with these and with your employees and really reshape and redefine the way learning is delivered and sort of amplify the learning experience for everyone there. And it's because of sort of investors like Facebook or Microsoft, IBM, Sony. There's so many out there, but they're all investing in technology, and in particular there's a few mediums that they're really investing in, and that's sort of then enabling us to then do so much more with the person, like a learner's journey. And because of that, we're really able to create quite immersive experiences that are really engaging. So things like virtual reality, which we're talking about today, augmented reality, which is going to be a huge thing, really going to be it's going to really define and change technology, artificial intelligence, and then also Unity, which is sort of a gaming engine that sits behind. So there's lots out there, but it's a really exciting time. But
yeah, thank you. So without further ado, I think we've got a bit of a profile of those. So we're just going to preview these really briefly because we're going to explore them a lot more deeply with our QA that follows next. So first up, we have Everyday Leader Beyond that Di is representing from Vicinity Centres. And I'm not going to talk about this in any great depth. I'm going to leave that in Di's capable hands. But I guess what we wanted to highlight is that the emerging tech or the tech space of these programs sat within a blended learning program, a multifaceted experience that included things like leadership masterclasses, peer coaching, more traditional e-learning modules. We had some social networking, and then we had these sort of launch and close activities, and it was the celebratory close or the graduation type experience where we decided to try out VR. And so this was a 6-month experience for about 160 leaders, and it followed hot on the heels of Everyday Leader, the original program that was closer to 300, I think, participants for that one. So that's the Everyday Leader Beyond program in a nutshell. I'll get Di to talk more about it in a moment, but I thought just before we start that, Tash, do you want to just give us just a quick rundown on VR and some of its current uses, just so we can make sure we've got a sort of even playing field in our audience?
Sure. So VR, you can see it on screen here. This is a 2D version of it, but it immerses a person, a user, into a 3-dimensional reality. And that can be a real-world replication or it can be an imagined world. And because you're in this 360-degree headset, you're really immersed in that environment and you're able to interact with it. In learning, there's a couple of uses where it's being primarily used, that being high-risk environments, also technical training like architecture, engineering, automotive industry, those kinds of things. And then lastly is really an empathy engine. So this is largely in the communication skills space. And that's really to encourage people to be put in another person's shoes. But it's really kind of a novel and immersive kind of experience for someone going through it. Yeah.
And how did we use it in this particular project?
Good question. So in the Everyday Leader Beyond, we used it to really amplify, I suppose, reflective practice. And so we really wanted to take people on a journey, and that was to really dial up the discovery theme and also leadership theme. And I suppose Di will talk to this very, very eloquently, but this idea that you're taking people on a journey, the voiceover really supports the visuals that go as you climb the summit, the mountain summit, and you get taken from a valley right the way through to what you can see on screen is the ends sort of sunset, and that encourages you to sort of notice, observe, reflect throughout that journey of the journey that you've had on the Everyday Leader Beyond.
Beautiful, thank you. And I like the point there, the experimental element is that it's not used as commonly in sort of leadership development, and particularly not leadership development at scale. So the research isn't quite as strong as tech, let alone emerging tech in that space. So we're really sort of pushing new ground or testing new waters there. Thank you. So with that preview for Everyday Leader Beyond, let's jump to the ANZ case study now that Ray will be talking to in a moment. And another thing to call out here, again, it was a blended experience with a number of different elements. It included an introductory animation to explain what ANZ means by new way of working, and really highlighting that that's a cultural mindset shift that they're trying to achieve as an organisation. It also included more sort of traditional vox pop style videos so that we could really hear authentic and genuine stories about people's change journeys as they move to those new ways of working. And then the tech parts that we'll be talking about a bit more today was how do we create really sticky learning using 3D interactive games, and also e-learning that had embedded 3D videos. And that was to look at both the new roles within an agile sort of approach, and also key things like artefacts and ceremonies that people needed to understand off the bat. So I didn't know of Webgl before we started this project, Tash, so I think we'll definitely need an explanation for the audience here. So what is Webgl?
So you can hear a lovely little voiceover coming through, but Webgl, it basically allows your browser, so it could be the Edge or it could be Safari or modern browsers, to talk directly to your laptop's graphics card. So that enables really cool visuals like what you see on screen here to play, and it doesn't take ages for the software to sort of download. So it's very quick, you don't need to download any software, and everyone can access it. That's probably the key message, is that everyone can access it. 93% of the world, if they have a modern browser, they can access it, which is pretty high. So you don't come up against those big those issues. And in learning, we couldn't find a single place that was using it. It's mainly used for websites and marketing websites, doing beautiful design websites. So that's probably where we took our inspiration initially. And one in particular was Unio, so you can check that out. That was a really cool website that brings to life this gamification idea.
Excellent, Tash. And how did we use Webgl? I mean, we've touched on that already in terms of some of the amazing and engaging visuals. But if we sort of look at the part that the learning part we're trying to amplify, what was that? And sort of the more experimental part of Webgl, because I think you shared it's been around since about 2011. So how did we use it in a bit of a different way?
Yeah, so Webgl has been around for ages. It's been always there, but we're just using it in a new way. And I suppose what's different and exciting about this is that the experimental bit was that we actually broke it down. So we used 3 technologies mixed together. So that's the kind of experimental element. These technologies all exist out there, but Unity, which is a gaming engine, so it's often used in gaming, and we built it all in that, all the characters and things like that, and then we exported it to Webgl. And it's not just HTML5 code for those who are techs in the room. So normal e-learning developer wouldn't have those sort of skill sets, but we built it so that you can see it in your browser, like you can see on screen, and then we wrapped it in a SCORM package, which you guys all might be aware of. So that then enables it to talk to your learning management system, LMS. And that's the combination of all three that actually is the cool bit about this thing.
And I might have to stop it there.
Long-winded way of saying there's a lot of testing to make sure it all happened, but we got there.
I can see the nods from Ray, yes. So Ray, we might kick into kind of some of the first questions to get under the hood of these, and given that we just finished up on ANZ, I might sort of throw to you first, but I guess I was interested around, if you take us back a step, we kind of previewed the solutions and the tech, but I was keen, and I think our audience would be too, about what business or learning drivers really pushed you into this technology and gave you that sort of opportunity.
Sure. So I guess if I look back on our journey, and I can see Jeff sitting in the audience there, when we first kicked off at ANZ, this journey to new ways of working, Jeff, myself and a couple of other people were running brown bag sessions on this content, and we were doing like 5 sessions a day. Each session went for an hour, and I think we did them for about 12 or 13 weeks. And we quickly realised that this wasn't going to be a sustainable way of delivering learning, particularly when you look at the sheer size of ANZ and the number of people that we needed to get to, and how far and wide they were spread. So we were then quickly told we need to digitise this. And that was the best way for us to move forward with getting this information out. So what we've put in this package is purely awareness information. So it's not replacing any kind of educational type learning or how-to learning, but what it is doing is it's building out the awareness of what is our change and what does it mean for our people. So it made really good sense, good learning sense, good business sense, good engagement sense to actually put this in a digitised format, which is when we then met these guys and kind of just gave a carte blanche remit of, well, if we're going to do this, it needs to look and feel really different, and we need to really push the boundaries. So come back to us with something that's going to inspire us to want to work with you, and they absolutely did. So the first taste that we got was a bit of that roles animation that we just played before, and I remember when I opened that up in my email when you guys first pitched it, and I went straight back to Meeks and Jeff and I go, this is the one that we need to go with. So, without knowing the amount of work that it was going to take to actually get to an end result.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll pick up on that work bit a little bit later. Thank you. And what about you, Dianne, and Vicinity Centres? What was sort of some of the either learning or business drivers to try out VR in the Beyond program?
I think one of them was trying to do something a bit different to the close of our first program. You mentioned Everyday Leader, which had about 300 leaders going through. So this is the same cohort that graduated through the next level program. So instead of bringing them together and celebrating together in each state, how can we do it differently, maybe budget-wise? And one of our values at Vicinity is imagining a better way. Our last masterclass on that slide is Imagine a Better Way. So I think we had to walk the talk, and the idea came from kind of left field, from my husband throwing a
Literally
phone
left field.
I was telling Tasha's story, Soccer World Cup, hot in our house, and he threw the phone in front of my face. I was cooking, saying, oh, you've got to see this because you can watch them all in VR. And I went, and then caught up with Justine again, reached out to them and said, can we do something like this? And that was the beginning of it. So it was kind of living our values that we're trying to ask our leaders to lead, and doing it ended up being a more economical way, in a different way, and we thought an exciting way.
Thanks, Di. And a question, either one of you, I'll probably hear from both of you, but either one can jump in first. But I imagine that there's people in the audience who are saying, gee, I'm working my butt off just trying to get e-learning up in my organisation, or just trying to make digital learning sort of, starting from the start. What were the different factors that you think helped to create the permission or platform to experiment in this space? Like shotgun.
I think definitely one of the things we've got Regs here, who's our head of OD. So leaders like Regan and then the rest of our HR leaders actually allowing us to be brave. I think you really need that support and endorsement to say, go try something different. So that was a big thing. If we didn't have that, I don't think we would have had that permission and the courage to try something different.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Dad. What about you, Ray?
Yeah, I think we were similar, and I think we took the mentality to that if we're shifting to what we're calling new ways of working, then we need to actually be really different. So whatever we produce in this banner needs to look and feel different to what people have experienced previously. And we kind of maintained that thinking across all of the programs that we tried to deliver. And I think too with e-learning, people get caught up in like this world of compliance. And the minute you mention e-learning, people just want to stick pins in their eyes rather than sit in front of their computer. So we were really aware of that factor as well. So it had to have some boom and bang for buck.
Excellent. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Ray. And I guess this, hopefully a feel-good and easy question to ask, but what are you most proud of in terms of working in that experimental tech space?
I can go. So just actually trying it, I guess, is the most proud thing. I guess we've kind of really underplayed back at work what we've actually done with this. So Tash said earlier that this is cutting edge technology, hasn't been used in learning anywhere before that we know of, and we're the first to try it. And it was hard and it took time, and there was a lot of test and learn, but we got a really great end product at the end of the day that we can actually build on, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more to later, but I guess I'm just really proud that we were brave enough to give it a crack.
How about you, Dianne? Different, similar reflections?
Very similar in terms of proud that we saw it through, the 160 leaders getting it out to them. And yeah, I think I'm most proud of us persisting despite, and I think we will continue to persist despite some of the, we didn't have as much excitement as we were feeling for the product, and that's some of our learnings, what we do differently, but it's not going to stop us from still pushing through. So that persistence, I think.
And so I guess we'll explore some of those learnings in a moment too, but what was the hardest thing about working in this space and with the tech?
The newness of it.
Yeah.
So I learned terminology I've never heard of before. Cam, who's not here, said some things like, it wouldn't work. And the appreciation for how much goes into creating it. So, please appreciate the trees that you see when you're looking at our experience, because I went, Cam, I don't think that's an Australian native tree. I didn't know what that meant for poor Cam to go and change the tree. So just, appreciation for how much is behind the scenes in creating this.
Yeah. And Ray, what about the hardest thing that you found throughout this project?
I would say very similar to that is when you look at an end product or when you see a prototype, you don't fully understand what goes in to make that character dance or move a hand or something like that. And then if you want to change, even the smallest change can be a really huge thing. So I guess it's the time and it's the test and the learn with the technology. So I remember having conversations often with Tash and Cam of we're experimenting at the same time as you. Like, we haven't done this before, so this is a learning experience for everyone. So that was pretty cool in itself. So I think the hardest part, if I bring it back to a work scenario, was then managing the expectation of our leaders and our people as to when we were going to deliver this. So we had some pushback on timeframes, which were all really relevant reasons as to why we needed to hold off. So managing and maintaining that expectation throughout the project and being able to see it through to delivery was probably a bit of a challenge for us, but we got there in the end.
And are we allowed to mention the massive roadblock you were able to move?
Which one?
I was thinking of, I don't know, something as simple as a global IT policy.
Yeah, so when we first went to do this, and thank you, it was probably more Meeks who shifted this for us than me, but we needed people, the best browser to use this in is Chrome, and majority of people at ANZ were on IE11. But to use Chrome, we had to untick a box that enabled 3D animation to be viewed. And Meeks was able to go and have, a couple of conversations with our IT people, explain what it was that we were wanting to do and get that lifted. So it was really quite simple. A simple thing for us to do, but did actually influence the IT policy that sits behind the stuff back at ANZ. So that was an awesome achievement on her behalf. So thanks, Meeks. You're a star.
Thank you, Meeks.
Having said that, though, with this technology, there are no further plugins or add-ins that you need to have on your software and your hardware. So that was a really big plus for us in going ahead with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
excellent. Thanks, Ray. And I know you're both at different states of implementation with the learning, but I guess people are probably really curious, and you've touched on it a little bit, Di, but what were sort of initial reactions? Who has experienced or seen it? And what are just some of the initial feedback that you're getting, even though we appreciate it's fairly early days?
Yeah, really early for us in terms of people actually going in and consuming this in the way that we would have wanted them to. There's a lot of change going on in our organisation right now. But initially, like, people who've seen it, they're blown away by it. It's kind of... it's a really different look and feel. They're engaged. I think they're surprised by what they're seeing. And maybe we've set a benchmark or a boundary around what people might expect going forward when they think about learning in a digitised way. But the proof will be down the track once we get more people consuming and utilising and gauging more feedback in that way. But initially it's been pretty good. So I would say surprise is... probably the first thing when people look at it. It's not quite what they're expecting to see.
Thanks. And Di, how about
so
with VR?
we wrapped up the program October last year. So the headsets and the experience were delivered in October. We had to avoid the November being in retail. And feedback was mixed. And we had a lot of very excited people. So apart from my kids being guinea pigs, our people and culture team were guinea pigs, and the enthusiasm and the surprise and the wow factor was right there. So we're like, everyone's going to think this as well. And the feedback has been mixed, but as you've reassured me, very in a positive way in terms of this is experimental. So I think we were expecting, and that's my learning, like not expecting everyone to be as excited as we are.
Yeah. So we want to give you now a sense of sort of reflecting with the person next to you, or you can turn around and sort of form little huddles, but we just want you to be able to have a chat in terms of what you heard, what you're still curious about. We're going to send through sort of in 5-10 minutes. We'll just see how much appetite there is for you guys to keep talking. We'll send some roving mics around, and we'll actually take some questions from you guys for Di, Ray or Tash. So that's the plan.
Thanks, Ray and Di. It's Dylan here. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I'm nervous now because we did not plant this question.
I think where our group and I had a couple of different discussions. Where we naturally went is, what's the business problem that we're solving? And I'm sure for Di and Ray, as you went through this, you must have thought, what are the other applications that are possible and potential, at Vicinity or at ANZ? So I'm just interested if this has sprung a bunch of other thoughts for you around what problems you might solve with different types of tech and learning applications.
So for us, definitely, ANZ is a really big beast of an organisation, and we're located in many, not only different countries, but geographies within countries as well. So we've got a lot of people that we need to get to. So the problem that we were solving for initially was brown bags, 1 hour, 5 times a day, 13 weeks straight, only in Melbourne wasn't going to cut it for our audience, so we needed to be able to scale that up. That's now translated to many other different things. So the Learning Academy, which was a team that I've since moved on from, but they've started self-servicing, or they've upskilled themselves to be able to create simplified videos internally for themselves. I'm now in employee experience, and we're thinking about exactly the same things, because we work with tech, product and service that we need to get out, and how do people use it, to our discussion. But most definitely the experience with working with these guys has been amazing, and really opened up our mind to how we can get some really big bang for buck stuff out there that'll engage people.
Yeah, like I was investing in, so we invested in exactly the same cardboard box, which was a little bit more, and by a little bit more, it was a few dollars more, but the quality we wanted so that people could keep it and potentially reuse it. And some uses our colleagues in Rem and Ben have looked at, they look after wellbeing, so there's a meditation VR that they're looking at. We know that there's already 160 people that can do that already. But also we've talked about in our team, like anything that we would love to go in the empathy space, maybe unconscious bias type pieces of training. Yeah, so it's piqued our thoughts for a lot of things. Yeah.
Any other questions?
That was a really good segue into Empathy Engine. I was really interested to learn more about that, because I think that's one of the challenges. We talk about soft skills and really throwing out that terminology soft. And Brené Brown talks about courage. I think Seth talks about real skills. How do you see, the virtual reality technology being used for empathy?
I could jump in there. Another experimental VR project that we worked on tried to do just that in the courageous conversation space. So the hypothesis we were working with there was that one of the main reasons that people leaders kind of put off or delay having these conversations is just the fear of what emotional wake might be created by this conversation. And so the hypothesis we were testing, and it was with it was a different project, but was what if we could almost desensitize people leaders through having a really immersive conversation experience where they sort of become the people leader, and so but they get to see a conversation play out from both their perspective as a people leader and also the recipients, or I guess the other person engaging in that conversation. So that was a completely different sort of space, but it was about just, there was even monologue that, internal thinking they could experience through that VR. So the idea was that could we just sort of make it as immersive as possible, so people were like, oh, by the end that wasn't so bad, or that felt quite raw and authentic, but and it was messy, but I could do that. So yeah, that's one way we've experimented so far. Yeah.
Great. I think there was a question over here as well.
I know you're at the start of the journey, but obviously what have been the steps around measuring, like you talked about obviously the take-up rate and that, have you been able to sort of move through to the embedding learning piece?
So for us, I wouldn't say that we're at embedding learning at this stage. So we're really quite in the uptake and getting people to consume. I would say in a few months' time, we'll be able to measure that kind of how have we embedded it and what has been a shift. But really for us, with these three modules that we've put out, we put them out under the guise of awareness. So we don't do any kind of assessment on any of this learning. It's really about what is new ways of working, what does it mean for you, and what is the language that we're talking about, to set people up in readiness to then come to other learning programs, to set them off on their journey. So we were really conscious of what do we want to achieve out of this. So we can't measure through assessment or, actual knowledge, but what we can look to is, the number of requests that come through for this kind of learning, but we're kind of not at that point yet.
And I guess I'd add there, Ray, so the animation game, we were sort of also testing the hypothesis around a pull rather than push approach to learning. So it's designed for a level of user agency when completing it. So you've actually got a couple of options in terms of questions you might ask to find out more about the roles. And it's designed so you actually have to choose. So you might not get to experience the full learning on your first play of the game. So we're curious, and we'll be able to start tracking these metrics about, do people actually get drawn into the game and want to ask new questions next time. So that's something that we can track and will track as it rolls out, and hopefully we get more usage stats than the addictive pinball game that was designed as a learning hook. So we'll also be able to track the pull of that.
We might have to actually block the number of times people can. I guess the other thing to know about this program as well is, whilst we've got the digital versions, the guys also created for us team-led facilitator guides. So what we're able to do is take the learning away from a traditional kind of L&D group and really bring that back to the team to lead this thinking around peer-to-peer learning, which, if you want to get to a learning organisation, that's kind of at the crux of that. So teams consume the digitised pieces, and then there's team-led facilitator guides where they can go through a bunch of activities together based off what they would have consumed digitally. And it was a conscious piece of work to not call it leader-led and to call it team-led, so that we start embedding that thought around peer-to-peer learning.
Any other questions? Last one. Does anyone want a final question? No? So there will be opportunity to ask a lot of questions. Maybe you didn't want to ask it in sort of with 70 other peers. So there will be an opportunity we're moving to shortly where we've got some experience stations set up, so you can have it now, having heard a little bit more about the projects, you can have a closer look at some of the deliverables and outputs of those. But we might just wrap up with R3. Tash and I sort of put our heads together around kind of R3 key takeaways around if you are going to work in this experimental emerging tech space, what we would recommend based off our experience. And the first is really to test thoughtful hypotheses. So you can get caught up in the excitement of kind of what's new and available, and we could really, this would be great, wouldn't it be awesome? But that is likely to detract from the learning outcome that you're trying to achieve. So in each of these projects and all of our projects, we try to identify, well, what is the learning outcome we're trying to amplify through this technology? What could this potentially do for us that existing technology that we already have access to can't? And so we're really trying to test those hypotheses through these projects. So that would be our first recommendation, just make sure that you're clear on what it is that you're testing, so you're going in eyes wide open around that. Our second recommendation would be conscious of where you're meeting people. So often when we talk about learning, we talk about meeting the learner where they are. But in the emerging sort of tech space, you might want to be meeting them a step or two ahead. You might want to be sort of shifting the digital appetite and literacy of the organisation through an intervention like this. But what we heard through our sort of case studies is that you need to make sure you're sort of almost counting the number of steps you can step forward so that you get the outcomes that you're looking for. So just be really conscious of the sort of, your digital literacy of your people, their general change readiness, because we talked a lot about the change management that actually you need to wrap around this, and the stakeholder management and the comms. And then the other sort of readiness piece is just what your organisation can actually practically achieve from a technical operating environment space. So that would be the next one. Be conscious of where you're meeting people, and yes, you might want to edge people forward, but know how big that gap is and plan for it. And then our last one really was identify and pick your trade-offs. So in an experimental and emerging space, there is not the application and the sort of tried and tested case studies to be able to reconcile every trade-off you might be wanting to manage in this sort of project. So an example might be that we need to promote global accessibility and scale, yet there might be cost or quality or timeline implications to that. Or you may have the idea for this amazing user experience, but there's technology constraints within your environment that are going to sort of pull on that and mean that there's a compromise. So at the moment, we were looking into the face of that. We're going to share a number of different headsets, for example, in VR, that range from a price point perspective. But if you're talking 160 people versus 10 versus 200, you've got to pick your trade-off in terms of how many people do we want to access this, and what is the minimum user experience we're trying to achieve. So it's really about just knowing that actually in experimental state, it's going to be hard to balance those perfectly. So know what's most important and just be aware of the sort of drawbacks that you may have to face through that. So they would be our top sort of takeaways. I don't know if you want to have any final takeaway that you would add to that list or reinforce those.
No, I sort of agree with all three of them, and it's just back yourself in the persistence despite roadblocks. I think we both had very differing roadblocks for different reasons, and they're very different learning pieces. So that's just, you've got to keep going if you're going to try something so different and new.
Yeah, thank you. So, right.
I guess my last takeaway is back yourself, so be brave, have a bit of courage, and trust the team around you. So I'm sitting up here today talking about this, but without Meeks, who's sitting down there, and her team, we definitely wouldn't have been able to get this off the ground. They did a lot of work in the back end with our LMS, and also these guys sitting up here. So I have a tendency to think like the biggest, most out there concept in the world, and Brad's laughing because he's on the same page as me. And often people need to bring me back down. But what I found with these guys were they were like, yeah, let's do that. Like, we can absolutely... And yeah, Cam and Tash were actually bringing more to the table than we would ever have imagined. So just trust in the team that you've got around you, and be patient, be brave, and see it through to the end, because it's worth it at the end of the day.
Thanks. And Tash.
And then, I was just going to add one final thing, which is try and always prototype at the beginning. So we really had a video concept that was to kind of sell this idea to Ray and the people in ANZ, and that was visual. People, you could experience it as a video, and then we built a test version and we tested it up front, and that's when we discovered that it wasn't going to work in ANZ, so we needed to change a policy to make it happen. So definitely prototype, and definitely build an alpha, just to test it all, and do all of that before you even go into build. That would be my top tip.